Hello. Well, I must say it's truly my privilege to be with you. And as Craig said, I have a background in agriculture, and I must say that I've got to warn you, actually, that my comments today, I'm going to talk a little about what I see as the future for agriculture in Iowa, some of the challenges I see agricultural areas facing, but I've got to warn you, I'm an unashamed, unabashed, proud advocate for agriculture. And I know you are. I know you are. I'm a farm boy. It's my life's blood, really, is agriculture. So I find it a little difficult being totally objective when it comes to talking about agriculture. But I want to today talk a bit about what are some of the issues that we see, or what I see, are facing agriculture, and particularly I want to make some comments about Iowa. As Craig said, I really have the privilege of travelling the world. I get to work in my country, I get to work right across your country, and I'm all the time dealing with and meeting with people who are really wrestling with the same issues you are, which is how do we make our industry, our region, our community a great place? How do we make it vibrant, prosperous, a good place to live? So I want to start off by talking a bit about what I see some of the forces that are marshalling themselves around the world that I think are going to have and are having profound and important impacts on our very future. What are some of these things that are occurring in the world that are and will shape our future? Let me talk a bit about the world economy. I'll give you some figures that I find absolutely astounding about what's happening on our planet. In the next 10 years, 250 million people are going to enter the workforce in India. That's almost the entire population of this country is going to enter the workforce in India. In the next 20 years, the forecast is that of all the buildings that are going to be built on this planet, half of them are going to be built in China. Most of us in this room have either lived our entire lives, or at least our adult lives, where this country, your country, was the largest economic force on the planet. However, the forecasts are that by 2020, so we're talking 12, 13 years' time, which will go like that. In 12 or 13 years, China's economy will be bigger than the US economy. What's that going to mean? What's that going to mean for rural Iowa? What's that going to mean for people who are involved in agriculture? I'm not sure we're absolutely clear yet. It's going to mean something, though. What's it going to mean to the psyche of a nation that's been essentially the superpower militarily, but economically, that no longer is going to be? Well, my view is that the farming sector and the Farm Bureau could be one of the biggest assets that rural areas have as they think about transforming themselves to be successful in the future. Why is that? Well, if you're a farmer, you're an entrepreneur. I know many farmers don't think of themselves as entrepreneurs, but let's look at it. You have a high tolerance to risk. I don't know what it's like in this country, but in Australia, farmers pretty much gamble $1 million on whether it's going to rain. That's the kind of gamble that a hardened gambler in Las Vegas would probably flinch at. And they do it every year. The rate at which farmers can assess, decide about, embrace and apply new technology points to that adaptive, innovative, entrepreneurial spirit. Many of you will have been using technology in your farming operations that wouldn't have even been on the radar 10 years ago. So consider there's an entrepreneurial spirit embedded in this sector of rural Iowa. But why isn't that entrepreneurial spirit being transferred to those rural communities? And I think the transference of that kind of mindset, that kind of thinking, that's going to be critical to the survival of your rural communities. See, there's an interdependent relationship between farming and rural communities. See, I think it will ultimately be a deep detriment to agriculture if rural communities in Iowa aren't vibrant, hopping, innovative, cutting edge, go-to kind of places. Why? Well, if you have more than one son, one of them is probably going to have to leave. Or if you weren't fortunate enough to be part of a farming family, there may be no opportunity for you in that community. My message or my point in this is that I have no question that rural Iowa is on the edge of perhaps one of the most exciting surges in history. The confluence of forces of global climate change and likelihood you're going to be a winner and some areas are going to be a loser. That's going to, in all likelihood, increase your biomass productivity. That's in your favour. Energy, big deal. You are in the box seat. If you can produce biomass, as you know, that's the renewable energies for the future. Not only that, but all the plastics and all that stuff that come from petroleum, that can be produced by biomass from plants. Consider that dark blue blob that sits over Iowa. That could be equivalent to the oil fields that sit under Saudi Arabia in the future. Enormous growth in major parts of the world, major populations, and they're going to go through that cascade of food demands that are going to include protein from meat, and then they're going to go to dairy, and then they're going to other things. Quite literally, you could be the breadbasket as you relate to yourselves in a whole new way feeding the world. So I have no question that those things point to a pretty rosy-looking future. It's going to take work to get there. We know that, right? It's not a done deal. It's not going to happen by accident. There's going to be challenges, all that stuff. But I know the farming community, like yourselves, has the capacity and the desire to adapt and invest and make the most of that. I think the real challenge, and I would suggest responsibility that also is going to come with that, is how do you make that benefit, that opportunity, be the catalyst for the resurgence of your rural communities? How do you have that be the catalyst for innovative businesses, for young entrepreneurs who come from rural areas but may not be connected to farming areas? How do you get your arms around that and capture that benefit to make a true and sustaining difference? Against the background of many of your counties are getting older and smaller in numbers of people. Now, there's no roadmap for this. This is one of these new challenges that I think we're facing in rural areas. If agriculture's doing great but our communities aren't, many of us would think, well, that's not our job. We're farmers. We drive the tractors. Well, I would suggest if you're a family, you have kids, any of you work off farm, yeah, it is your business what happens in those communities. And in fact, if not you, as a segment of the population, if not you as an organisation, then who? So you consider you're highly organised, well-resourced, well-equipped, have all sorts of capacity for transference of leadership, development of leadership, innovative ideas, research and development, all sorts of great stuff, right? And it's not going to take much, in my view, to have that spill over to create a truly innovative entrepreneurial environment in rural Iowa. But what it's going to take is the willingness to come together and have some really challenging, intellectually challenging, not challenge, but intellectually challenging and provocative conversations about how is this world unfolding under our feet? If there seems to be this gathering perfect storm, how do we start to think about that now? How do we start to connect with young people? How do we start to connect with our non-farming component of our rural communities? How do we find that way forward? I suspect it could be one of the most fruitful dialogues. But there's no textbook in it. You could be at the cutting edge of that. So you have a real advantage because you're unlikely to be dealing with a tragic decline because it stopped raining. I suspect that's what we're going to largely deal with in our country. a radical adjustment of how we know ourselves, because our agriculture is going to get much tougher, certainly in major parts of our country. Now, I know you're up to it, right?
Yeah.
You really are, right? Yeah. And I would suggest that it's probably something that you all want anyway. Because, we may think of ourselves as farmers, but we're really part of a community or a society that is people who have an interest in or a passion about rural life.